Okay, wow. So we were saying that there might be some 2300s in the event. Certainly didn't expect that the first game would be against a 2350 rated player. So competent player here, and we should play some serious chess. So we've got an e4, e5 position here, and white goes for bishop c4, which is the most trendy move. It's the Italian game. And I'm responding with bishop c5. The biggest difference, for me at least, between bishop c5 and knight f6 is that with knight f6, white, there's certain lines that white might have that involve, for example, an early castling, that against knight f6, you don't have this option because the pawn is hanging on e4. On the other hand, when the knight goes to f6, white has this move knight g5, pressing because the black queen is not covering that square. And this is actually in itself not a big deal. Black proceeds with d5 and theory considers black to be in good shape. But it does mean that if you go for this knight f6 move order, you have to learn not only certain transpositions to bishop c5, but you also have to learn these knight g5 positions well enough to play them. And at the moment, I'm quite shaky on those positions. So now I'll go knight f6 when knight g5 is not such a big deal because I'll castle. Black plays d4, white rather plays d4, I capture the pawn. And white can take the pawn, but the antidote to that is to give this check. And because of the attack on the pawn on e4, black is considered by theory to be fine. So white usually plays this move e5. And black's response is one that's essential for players to know who are playing these kind of positions regularly. And it is this move d5. Because otherwise, if in this position, for example, you went knight e4, I believe that even the move bishop d5 here creates some serious problems, or maybe queen e2. I can't even remember which is the most precise move right now because I know that you absolutely have to play d5, and basically at this level, people are not talking too much about that. Now here the main move is bishop to b6, but there's also this try of bishop to b4. In this case, I'm just going to go ahead. I'm going to go for the most typical move, just pressing here the pawn on d4. And now I'm going to go ahead and bring my king to safety here. I'm not concerned, I should say that I'm not so concerned about knight takes e4 and pawn takes e4, because first of all, my pawn on e4 for now wouldn't be hanging, but secondly, there's a lot of pressure on that knight and then on the center, so the center would fall, so this is not a bad idea. Queen c2, this is a strange looking move to me. Can I not take the pawn, takes? This is usually not the way that they play. I don't know, do they play first with bishop e3, castle, this kind of approach, fortifying the center, sometimes taking this knight on c6 in certain situations. But playing like this seems very strange to me. Maybe it's theory and I'm just not familiar with the idea, but if I simply exchange everything and he takes here everything, and then I were to play a move like maybe even bishop takes e5, queen takes e5, and then just this calm move c6, no, that doesn't work because bishop e2. My idea was any other retreat and I'd have rook e8 with the king and the queen hanging here. One other option, bishop f5, is very attractive to me here. I'm just going to go with bishop f5. I did something there, notice that if I were my own student, I would sort of give out to them, you shouldn't do this, certainly over the board, which is, in a position like this, I admit it's really appeared as though all I did was I spent a bunch of time thinking about this, and then I didn't like it, and then I immediately switched to something else, and I didn't stop to think about it much. The reality is, I had actually initially not talked about it, but initially spent some time looking at this move. I hadn't vocalized that, and so I wanted to clear that up because it might give some people the impression like, oh, the right thing to do is first try and spend all your time on this, and then if it doesn't work, then just the next move you see, just fire it out instantly. That's a recipe for disaster, of course. So usually be careful with that kind of an approach. Okay, so queen b3 here. In other words, you should spend a little bit more time on whatever is going to be your final move. Okay, so he moves the queen a second time. Certainly does not stress us in principle. And now the question is, do I want to capture the pawn? And if so, with what piece? So for example, bishop takes might be one of the ideas here. Certainly it's interesting, but after castle, I'm not sure that I've gained anything by capturing with the piece that is not. And see, I've kind of done it again, right? But basically, my point is here: if bishop takes, the way I was seeing it is there is some pressure here. Maybe white would castle, but then what do I do? Maybe something like takes, but I've lost my bishop. Or if I could take like this takes and then drop the bishop back, but then it feels slower. So in the end, ultimately, I figured let's just take here, and he's still not in time to capture this pawn because the f2 thread is hanging. And after castle, now what I'm thinking is maybe a move like c6 here might be quite nice just to hold the fort here. The other option would be to play bishop takes, but after queen takes here, I'm not really seeing anything concrete. So I like this move c6 here. I can pre-move knight takes e4, bishop takes e4, but in general, the situation looks pretty bad, pretty bleak for black. Queen h4 is definitely on the cards as a possibility. Bishop takes e5, of course. The only thing with bishop takes e5 is just queen takes b7, and that's something that ideally I'd like to prevent. But bishop takes, I'm seeing that if queen takes, knight takes, pawn takes, bishop takes, in this position, the rook would be in trouble because bishop b2 is met by rook b8. Now, the problem with that is after bishop takes, he might be able to take here first, take here, and then take the pawn. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first take here and then take here in order to indirectly defend this pawn because of bishop takes c3. And I'm not seeing any way that he can avoid further material losses. However, I missed bishop a3 here, which looks like a pretty smart move. And now I'm looking, do I have any clever way myself to somehow defend this pawn, maybe even throwing in, some material. Rook e8, queen takes. What I've noticed is actually this bishop is now hanging. So after bishop takes, the bishop and the rook would be hanging. And if rook here, bishop d2 looks pretty good to me. I think that in that case, I'm winning some material. And also, if for whatever reason that line doesn't work out, I mean, I always have a million different ways of sort of bailing out, so to speak, in this position. One of the things about this position that's worth noting is that there's quite a lot of looseness in the position. In other words, my bishop on f5, instability is the word I'm looking for. My bishop on f5 is unstable here in that it's undefended. My pawn on c6 is, of course, undefended. My bishop on d2 is also undefended. And given the fact that my rook wants to take the bishop on e2, this rook here on a8 feels like it might become what I call loose or loosely defended, which is when you have the same number of defenders as you do attackers. So here you can see that for now I have these two defenders on that rook on a8, but potentially I'm going to lose one of those defenders, at least if I get my way in some of the variations. So the moral of the story is in such positions you should be kind of careful against tactical counter threats from white, or from the opponent. But in this case, I sort of cycled through the different possibilities, like any move that could hit this bishop. I didn't really see anything dangerous. For example, if this pawn wasn't here, but rather here, let's say, or just wasn't there at all, then I would be having to consider moves like rook c5, right? Dealing with this threat and creating a tempo against my bishop. I considered such a move against this bishop, which would be rook here, in my initial calculations, but the idea is that after rook takes, I'm actually defending this bishop. And then again, that rook on e2 will be undefended. So again, I go back to that process of trying to figure out, is there some way in which he can punish that rook being undefended? So for example, a move like queen a6. But there I feel like I have a move like queen e8, and then I'm really happy. Notice when a lot of the time when master level players say, oh, I'm really happy with the way a piece is placed or something, or with my position, a lot of the time they're referring to harmony and to just extracting maximum value out of your pieces. So queen on e8, typically not a good square for the queen, but in this configuration of pieces, a queen that defends the points c6, a8, and e2 and lends so much harmony and stability to the position would obviously be very welcome. Bishop has come to a6, so I'm going to take this rook. And now what I'm thinking is I'll play the move queen b6 here. I like this move because I don't see any squares for the queen to escape, except if it captures this pawn. But the problem is the back rank issues for white. So, you know, for example, if you play queen takes c6, then I'll go queen takes c6, rook takes c6, and rook e1 is a nasty check. Now, it's not checkmate because of bishop f1, but in the end, bishop to d3 would pick up the rook. So the move g4 is, I think, designed to create back rank squares, and as a consequence, hold on a second, I'm just thinking about the move. Yeah, create back rank squares, and as a consequence, create the possibility of capturing this pawn. So my question is, do I care in terms of, you know, why not just play something like bishop takes? After all, if rook takes, queen takes, bishop takes, the position is winning because of the material. But I'm thinking, can I be clever here? For example, the move rook here is one idea, or another move is bishop c8. I just realized, of course, bishop c8 would be a big mistake because I would drop this material. Although queen takes a6 there, rook takes, queen takes a3, rook takes. No, it's too dangerous, it's too messy. So I'm not interested in that. One other idea, a move like bishop d3. The idea is that if bishop takes, I can take the queen. And if he goes bishop takes, and if he goes queen takes, pawn takes, and then takes bishop, then we can take here on a3. So I like this move. I like any move where I'm closer to getting rid of material. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's just blunder check it. I'm not seeing any real mistakes. And again, notice that tactical creativity, right? Because I say creativity because if you look at this move, some people might say, oh, that's quite a creative solution. But notice how it's premised in fundamentals, like the fact here that this bishop is loosely defended. It's got one attacker and simultaneously one defender. And this guy has no defense. And of course, X-rays, which we know are very, very popular tactical tool, or like a feature that lends itself to a lot of tactical possibilities. So bishop d3 is sort of born out of those points. Rook takes c6 makes a lot of sense. And here I'm just wondering, do I have the possibility of an immediate kill with something like this? The problem with all of this is that in the end, this rook on a8 is hanging. If my rook was here on f8, then I could continue with a move that isn't, with a move that isn't, hold on a second. I just realized I don't have so much time, so I'm trying to just calculate, but I'm not seeing anything there. So I'm not seeing here check, for example. There's this check because if bishop takes, I can go queen takes. There's also this check, but he just seems to run. He always seems to run. There's check, king there. It's too messy. I cannot calculate it completely, so I'm going to go ahead and just simplify the position. And to be honest with you, definitely don't do like what I've just done, where there's been far too much time has been burned. I've left myself with a bit less time than I would be comfortable against such a strong player. So I've made life for myself needlessly complicated. Now I'm after realizing that after queen takes, I could actually potentially go for this check instead, but I don't think I'm going to do that. This time around, I am going to stick to my strategy of just trying to play reasonably quickly. I don't like f3 for him too much because it gives me a bunch of tactical possibilities against his king by locking it here. Of course, he's relying on the fact that if rook takes c5, rook a8 would be mate, hence the move h5 here. But the problem now is I'm ignoring the situation here on the king side, and I'm threatening to advance. He cannot take this pawn. I'm going to go d3. If he ever goes bishop a3, he's going to self-pin, so I'm expecting a move like maybe g takes h5 here. But then I'm wondering after rook b2, rook b8, how does he stop this move? So maybe this is his solution. Let's go ahead and take here for now. So it's possible that, and now I'm thinking rook here. but also, yeah, let's just go rook here, because I think probably what he needs to do is exactly this. And then I'll just play like this, and if bishop d4, I'm actually going to go d2, and I won't even defend. I'll actually go rook here so that I keep the rook, and yeah, I think that's that. I left myself with too little time. Very interesting position. The one that sort of caught my attention was this position here. And again, one thing that I've said in previous streams is, maybe you feel like you're not putting away your opponents enough. So what most people are doing is they take a look at a position like this where they were winning and maybe they ended up losing it, and they feel like it happens too much, and so they start to moan about the fact that their opponents get away, etc., etc. Of course, I've done this a million times myself. It's human nature to a certain extent. But one thing that a lot of the top guys are doing is they examine these situations, and they're saying, oh, I'm failing quite a lot in these situations, so I'm gonna take a closer look and try and get to the source of what exactly I'm doing wrong, mess around with these positions, and maybe do little self tests. Like in this position, for example, you could give yourself 10 minutes and try and figure out what is the most precise solution. And let's assume that you figure out bishop d3 is the most precise solution. Then in this position here, I just couldn't work out rook e1. And I was seeing ideas like rook e1, king here, bishop check, probably king here, rook check. And then I was thinking, what if king here? Because if he takes, I felt like that's actually, maybe I'm totally wrong, but it felt like it would be too much risk. I'm just trying to work it out now. But I think that if you take, there's a checkmate somewhere there. I think I see one in g5, for example. I'll just show. So we were saying check. Sorry, no, we were saying check, king here, check. Which one did I actually say? Did I say first this check? I think this check, yeah. Sorry, king h3, rook check. And now it was the line that had me a bit stuck was king here, because I think that this line here takes king here. And now I was thinking check. If king here, eventually I'll have bishop g2 immediately, checkmate. And then I thought king here or king here. And if king here, I felt f6, it's game over, because rook takes is queen takes, and then queen h6 is mate. And if king here, bishop g6 would be game over. While if you go in this position, if you go king h5, then I feel like at the very least there's bishop g6 check. If king here, it's h6 mate. And if rook takes, it's pawn takes, king here, and queen f6. This is checkmate. So, but after this, in my calculations, what I saw was, first I thought queen d8, but then I saw the bishop and the queen are actually hitting that square. And then I thought, I don't have any more checks. And at this point, if my rook was here, then I would be able to have the time for a quiet move, like maybe queen d4, or even rook h3, king takes and queen takes f2. Maybe is some kind of mate, some kind of mating net. I don't know. But in this position, it feels like the only move I would have is g5, and after king takes, I'm really not sure what exactly, where exactly I'm going with this. And the engine says that in this position, yeah, that I don't have. Oh wow, amazing, beautiful idea here from the engine. H6, cool as you like, gives up this rook, and the point is after king h7, there's nothing. So there I kind of picked up some little idea that maybe if I do this kind of work enough, it might make me a little bit more tactically creative, because I've seen this pattern many times before. But anyway, interesting game, poor time management on my part, but thankfully a very good position out of the opening, so was all good.